Welcome to Real Learning with Real People, where we learn from authentic and remarkable people in order to enhance the lives of our listeners. I'm Ken King, and I truly appreciate you joining me to learn today. This show was created in order to learn from and connect with people who have great lessons and stories that will positively impact listeners from all walks of life. In these unscripted conversations, we dive into the upbringing of our guests in order to really gain an understanding of their framework for life and who they are. Then we walk alongside them as they show us how that framework has impacted them in what they do. This is intentional because when we understand that who we are and what we do are different, we can really start to see how they are connected to performance, learning, creativity, and inclusivity. Now let's jump in as we chase some real learning from some real people. On the show today, I have Amy Johnson from the Confidante Miami Beach. You may have stayed there or heard of it because it's a part of the Unbound Collection by Hyatt Brand. Now, if you've ever stayed at a Hyatt property, you know that they have some seriously great properties, but even better people in them. Amy is a hospitality professional with more than 30 years of industry experience. She served as general manager of Hyatt Regency Calgary and began her Hyatt career in 2000 after an impressive run at Fairmont Hotels. In her career, she's been trusted with properties such as the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, where she helped relaunch the hotel after its $175 million renovation. Amy then transitioned to Hyatt's corporate office to support the revenue, sales, and events division as director of events for the Americas from 2007 to 2015. On top of all this, Amy's been the sales and events lead for opening and transitioning more than 45 hotels. So it's fair to say that she can manage just about anything, which is both a pun and a teaser of part of our chat. Now, I want to be clear, Amy's on this show because of who she is and what she's done. I've known her now for a couple years, and we have often joked that it feels like we've known each other forever. And I give all the credit to her because she's so authentic and empathetic in how she shows up for people that she's really made our friendship and professional relationship so rich and meaningful that I can't thank her enough. I know you'll love the conversation with Amy because you'll be able to feel the connection to her through her great stories and authentic communication. Here's my conversation with Amy Johnson from the Confidante Miami Beach. Amy Johnson, how are you today?
I'm good, Mr. King. How are you?
Good. I don't get called Mr. King very often, especially on here. That's you're the
I don't think I've ever called you that. It's always Ken, but it's kind of a famous name in Calgary, so you kind of have to think about that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I am the only one now, so
yes,
I have to do the name some level of justice.
Yes, well, you do. He would be proud.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's very high praise. I feel like we should just send it here. I don't know if I can, I don't know if it's going to get much better for me going forward.
Yeah, I had lots of opportunity to work with him when I was in Calgary, and he was phenomenal. What an amazing ambassador to the city.
Yeah, and for those people that are watching and listening, we're speaking about the other Ken King, as many people in Calgary refer to him. I'm the other Ken King here, who was well known as the owner of the Calgary Flames. But everything that I've come to understand is that he was so much more than that to the community and did so much good. And now I'm the only Ken King, so I've become the Ken King by default here in Calgary, and just trying to do my best to live up to the great legacy that he left for the Ken Kings of the world.
Yeah.
There's also a Ken King who I believe is a Republican state senator in Texas, because I get Google alerts on his name all the time because I have my Google alert turned on for my name.
Yes, you're correct. Yes.
I keep meaning to touch base with him and just let him know that I've followed his political career closely by accident. So you've already turned it turned the whole show on its head, because usually we're already deep into talking about the guest by now. So as usual, we like to get a really good idea, not just about what people have accomplished, but about who people are, and really try to connect that to what people have accomplished and the impact that they've had on the world. So if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about where you come from, what growing up was like, siblings, parents, all that kind of stuff, just so we can really get a good idea of your lens or framework for life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm from a large family in British Columbia, so I was of that era where there were those large Catholic families that filled the pews in the church. We were one of them, the Johnson family. So there was 7 children and mom and dad, and I'm the second from the youngest. So it was a very busy household. My 2 oldest sisters, they kind of transitioned out of the house. Well, the 5 of us, the 3 boys, then after them, my 3 brothers, myself, and then my sister Teresa. So it most of the time felt like we were in a family of 5, which the 5 of us did enough trouble for 7. So it was it was fantastic. But I think growing up, I would never, I've said this to many people, I would never give up the experience of growing up on a farm. I think farm life just teaches you when you don't even know it as a kid. It's already preparing you to be a leader because of how it impacts your it's just everything about what happens with your family and you know, your mom, your dad, and of course all of our relatives lived in mostly Vancouver. So, you know, that was a great spot to come to the Okanagan Valley, southern Okanagan Valley. This was way before the grape time and wine. It was more fruit orchards, but you know, we had a large family, a large pool, and so we worked hard and played hard. But we had lots of cousins around, and it was amazing, I think, Ken, because you know, people would laugh when they would come visit our family because, you know, us kids at age of 6, 7, 10, we drove everything, the lawnmower, the tractors. So, you know, I think you have a resilience that's like built in, that you can fix anything, you can do anything because you just make it happen on a farm. So I think that looking back now through the lens of where I am, I see so many things where you learn skills growing up. You didn't even know, you know, that we were learning them, I don't believe. And then also the 5 of us all involved in sports, right? So there was hockey, there was show jumping, figure skating, basketball. My sister and I were big basketball players and loved basketball. And that was the time still when you know, University of Victoria and Ken and Kathy Shields were doing basketball schools in the southern Okanagan, and it was phenomenal during that time growing up. But I think the other thing that was impactful too was we always had animals around, and I there's something about, you know, dogs and animals and growing up on a farm and your connection to animals. I don't know if it makes you just more intuitive, a better listener. There's a sensate quality that's strong. My dad was like the animal whisperer. I mean, he could do anything with animals, and we all learned that. I mean, our specific farming operation was a cow-calf operation when we were there, and we really worked. Everyone had chores, so it didn't matter. You know, basically, when we were old enough to do stuff, we all had chores. But you know, it was interesting how the collaboration that you learn on a farm. Maybe that's why mom and dad had so many children, because they thought, well, this is a big farm. How are we going to manage all of this without a lot of children? And we always thought it was because they were Catholic. Maybe it's because they had a farm. I'm not sure. But you know, I think that I always told my dad and my mom, I said, you know, I think growing up on a farm teaches you to have like street smarts, if you can use that term, even though we were nowhere near a city. So I don't know, it was pretty amazing. I would have to say that probably the most, one of the most impactful things through that time was my dad was a recovered alcoholic. So that happened in my teens. So for all 5 of us, we were in our teens, and it was I think traumatic for our family to go through that, but I think at the same time, how dad came out of it was so huge that it changed our lives, but in a good way, very much a good way. So that would be growing up on a farm. It was busy and fun and lots of good memories.
That's awesome. And I hope that and you and I experienced this a while ago, but I hope that the people listening or watching or have already kind of gotten a little bit of the feel for what I think I felt when you and I first met, which was that you're just so authentic. And like even now, it's like our conversation has been a hug. Like I feel like I'm with family, just in the way that you talk and the way that you describe your experience growing up. I as we spoke about before, I'm currently learning a little bit about farm life because of my situation, and I can tell you a story sometime about the horse trailer full of hay that we had to load and unload twice. Another time, but there's so much that you just shared out of that I connected with and that I want to go a bit deeper on. But before I do that, I want to ask a bit about, if you had to describe mom and dad each with a word, what would that be?
I think for mom, it would be the organizer, because she had a lot to organize. I think for dad, it would be wholehearted.
Oh,
yeah.
You even bucked the system and used a hyphenated word.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking of that. Yeah, just now, that it's not really one word, but
no, that's
I'm
perfect.
going to call the Brene Brown there and say one word.
Great reference. It's amazing how much Brene just gets thrown into these conversations, which I think means I'm picking the right people.
Right.
And so I don't, and you can feel free. I don't want to go too deep into this, but you kind of alluded to it when you talked about your dad being a recovering alcoholic. Was that like, anytime I hear somebody talk about somebody in the process of or having recovered from addiction, and various mental health illnesses as well. I've talked on the show before about my younger sister and her battle with an eating disorder, and I just love those moments, watching them like a phoenix out of the ashes, like that moment where it's like they've been burned, things have been challenging, and I'm getting emotional now talking about thinking of her even, and then you see them rise. I think that's why I like coaching and teaching and any of that stuff on a different scale and a different lens. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like maybe some of that is why you enjoy doing what you do? Is a very different context, absolutely. But when you see somebody just overcome, even if they're overcoming mm-hmm. themselves, is that a big piece for you?
I think it is. The word that would come to mind, the way I would articulate it now, looking back and how it's formed me, I would say resilience. Because I think that you learn to see the true person in addiction differently, and because that's not them.
Yes.
But as they recover, it's like dad that I knew before came back. So now I'm getting emotional. But, the dad is a young girl. And it was one of the things I was thinking of is I used to follow him around on the farm. But, he's a big guy and he's going and I couldn't keep up. So I had my hand in his back pocket and off I went, asking who knows how many questions about who knows how many things, my curiosity. And he always had an answer. That dad came back. So that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are, I want to be very clear that we're, just for anybody listening, we're not comparing the alcoholism to eating disorders to coaching and teaching, or anything. We're not comparing anything here. We're just talking from experience. And, and what I am experiencing in terms of seeing sibling the way that I remember them again. Mm-hmm. That's very surface. Obviously, it's very raw, and it's good. It's refreshing too. It's energizing, and
yes.
And it's amazing. It's one of those things where you realize what people are capable of. And I think anytime that you experience it yourself or you watch somebody else just go through the full gamut and then kind of rise again. Not only, you use the word resilience, which I love and we talk about it a lot, but it's not just resilience for that person either. It's,
Mm.
there's a big orbit of people that have to be resilient as well. It's not their fault, and to be clear, it's not, nobody's passing blame or judgment, but there's resilience beyond just the person that's right in the trenches at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you feel like that made you, that resilience that you were required to have in those moments, really kind of hardy, made you a little bit more hardy, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the part with probably any addiction, but specifically for what we grew up with, I think it, that they use the term survivor, right? So I think it puts you in a mode where you're trying to navigate, and maybe before you're at the age you should be navigating some of those things. So I think it does, for me, the survivor can also turn into something very difficult as an adult. But for me, that's moved to resilience. So I use a different word now. But I think some people have gotten stuck on the survivor part of their journey. And I'm very grateful that hasn't happened to me or my siblings. But, when Dad was recovering, what we went through, Ken, was we did like a family intervention on how it impacted each of us. So I think that kind of created a new journey for us. So it changed how we, because it gave us time to talk to Dad about it and him to talk to us.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of pivoted the narrative. That's I think a big blessing for our family. And some families have a very different journey, depending on what that narrative has been during the recovery. So for us, we went from survivor to resilience. And I think when I think of an organization that we both know in Calgary called CUPS, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they talk about bringing families from the places they're at, the families they serve, to bringing to a place of resilience to stop the cycle. So I think that's a really powerful piece when that happens with addiction, that we can change that narrative and pivot in a new direction, take all those things you've gone through, and they start to develop into very positive leadership qualities that I don't think any of us kids knew that we were going to have, but all of us have come out as natural leaders. Not the ones saying me, just always the ones that rise to the top naturally. Kind of the quiet leader, I guess I would say.
Yeah, it brings up something that I say often now in our stuff that we're doing, whether it's training or consulting or even just some mentoring stuff that may not be a part of the business but is more informal, is a phrase that I think I've shouted it at athletes, and I've yelled it at somebody when they're in a tough moment too, where I've said, leverage your pain, leverage it. Like it's like you can be in it. And I'm not going to make you try and come out of it if you're not ready. But at some point, it's time to take it and leverage it. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a selfish thing, or maybe it does for you. Maybe you need to leverage it for you. Maybe you need to leverage it for somebody else. But at some point, you can really start to use it as fuel and have it take you somewhere that maybe you might not have gone had you not experienced it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think either of us were planning on talking about that.
No, I don't think so. That's usually how our conversations go.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it actually brings up very organically the fact that one of your strengths in leadership, especially in at like a corporate leadership level, would, in my opinion, is really just that ability to connect. And do you do that with intent, or does it just more come naturally?
And this may sound like a strange, I guess the answer is kind of twofold, but I think that was something that my dad was very much that guy. But I also think we learned it from being with animals. Like, I think there's something about, because it's not about you, it's about them. And so I think that there's a mixture in there, but I think animals, my dad always used to say to us kids, if someone comes to the farm and the dog doesn't like them, that you kids shouldn't like them either. So I was like, okay, well, now we know we're safe. If the dog doesn't bark, you're a good person. But, that was always how he would phrase it. And I think that, I have a lot of dad in me, I think, because he just had a way with people. He was always the guy that went for the underdog. We don't use that term very much anymore, but you know what I mean from his era.
Yep.
And I think I was learning inclusion before we talked about that word either, because I think it's just, if there was a seat at the table, he was going to go find somebody that needed dinner, and now they're at our table. Who knows who they were, where they came from. And I think that as a young person growing up in that environment, you look through a very different lens because you're learning about them. How did they end up at your table? And I think that all of us kids are the same way. Like we bring people in, we are very empathetic. And I think it's through that lens of how dad was. And also, I guess it would be the 12-step program, right? You have to give back. And he lived that. So I think for me, it's really impacted me as a leader to never ask my team to do something I wouldn't do, and to be in the trenches with them. And in the hotel business, there's a lot of trenches you can be in. But I think as a leader, it's critical to be able to do that. And I think of the time we're living in now with the pandemic. Our team in the hotel I'm at right now in Miami Beach, we had 286 colleagues. We're down to 75, where you're going from, low occupancies to high occupancies on the weekend. You really have to be able to pull the team together and coach like you would if you were in a basketball game, a football game. It's like, how do you win each day, and how do you do that and continue to inspire and move forward in a difficult time? I think I would not be able to do that if I didn't have the ability to connect with people really quickly in an authentic way. And I think in Miami, Ken, it's been huge for me because, you rarely don't meet anyone that was born in the US. It's very much a multicultural city. And they love that I'm not, American. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that they're like, oh, she understands. She's on a green card. She's been an immigrant. Yes, I speak the language, but I think that it's been very impactful for them, just in my ability to connect, because there's a common ground.
Yeah, I really think that you're going deep into your connection strategy too, which you didn't articulate this way. So tell me if I'm making assumptions, but it really just sounds like it's centered around empathy, like being in the trenches with them, genuine empathy too, not false empathy.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I think, and again, this is going to sound funny, but, when my dad would say to us about, if the dog likes them, you should let them in. I think that, I've learned from that, trust your gut. Like if something doesn't feel right, something's not right. And then that, maybe that person is not going to interact with the team well. And as the leader, you need to know that when you're on the sideline and you're the coach and the ball's not getting down the court, it's us that has to say, what's not working? Is it the play? Is it the person? Do we have to change something? So I always look through that lens when I'm looking at the team and how am I performing as a leader. Is I need to be because if I'm the coach, I can't carry the ball. If I'm carrying the ball, wow, we've got a real challenge, because that's not okay. So I try to always teach my leaders that, like, guys, you can't be carrying the ball, because you already have a quarterback and you have all these people that need to be doing that if we're leading the way we should be leading, to inspire them to learn what they need to learn, to have the skills to then lead the people they're working with.
Yeah, I love you really just managed to thread that all the way through about three different domains and connect leadership. It must be something to do with proximity to Pat Riley that just allows you to really articulate stuff a little bit more clearly.
Well, I think I shared this with you. One of my most favorite sayings was, Pat Summit, and talking to her dad after a big win. And he said to her, well, you know what they say, you can't take donkeys to the Kentucky Derby. I remember thinking, wow, okay, that's a little harsh. But he's right. Like, there's no donkeys there. They're all thoroughbreds. So I think that it's having the empathy to help them grow, and it's being results driven to then also, there's got to be 50-50. It's got to be the empathy to grow, and then the ability to produce the result, whether that's the win, the financial result, whatever those results are that you're going after. But I think for me, I always use the sports analogy because I think, this is the land of sports, and so they love the analogies. Everybody has a favorite: football, baseball, basketball, they get the analogy. But I think it also changes the narrative around that person may not be performing here, but you could say that about a quarterback playing for this team that then gets sent to a different team and is a totally different quarterback. I mean, we saw that in the first weekend when you look at New England, right? I mean, so, okay, a change of scenery, that person now is doing something different. So it allows you to do that without feeling bad for that performer. You're just saying, we've got to change the fit. And that's okay. You have to have that dialogue. But sometimes the heart overtakes the result, and that it's finding the balance that I think is key.
Yeah, and it brings up a good point in both directions, which is that the heart can't take over the results, and the results can't take over the heart. And it's interesting to me because what you're seeing right now to use sports again in the NBA finals is these coaches that are very player-centric coaches with high levels of empathy and relationship-based approaches to their craft, like Nick Nurse in Toronto, but also Brad Stevens in Boston, Eric Spoelstra in Miami, Mike Malone in Denver. I'm not going to speak about the Lakers coaching staff right now, but because I know you're pulling for them. But I just think that we're seeing more and more. One of my idols is Pete Carroll in Seattle because the way he approaches his craft is just so unique. I was just listening to him on a podcast yesterday, and he's got a 50 whatever person roster, and he openly says he coaches them all individually. They all have individual standards, and they have team standards too, but they're an individual, and I'm going to hold you to the standard that you should be held to. And it doesn't mean that anybody's held to a low standard. They're just different standards. And then he couples that with the fact that everything's a competition and try and win every moment kind of thing. So, right. which is exactly what you're talking about. You connect with every single one of them, but you make it clear to every single one of them that every single thing we do in this organization is competitive.
Yes. Absolutely it is. And yeah, that's a really great example. He is a phenomenal coach. Watching him on the sideline, sometimes I just wish they would leave the camera there. He chews his gum and he's intent, and just his intensity, watching the relationship that he has with the players is amazing. It's he's one of my favorite coaches.
Okay, let me take a second to talk about our partner, Reflect. Reflect is the easiest way to find a therapist. Just like our guests here on the podcast, we all go through phases in life that help us to learn, grow, and develop. And oftentimes they involve some change, whether it's a breakup and a new reality of being single, or maybe a promotion at work and a new work-life balance situation. Whatever your situation, Reflect helps you to find a therapist that is a perfect fit for you. Reflect actually uses an algorithm and an experienced team to match you with the best therapist. And thanks to this, 80% of their clients see a meaningful improvement in their lives after just 6 sessions. And depending on where you are, you can actually choose between in-person or teletherapy. So starting therapy, which is the biggest challenge for me, has never been easier. So as our partner, Reflect wants to give you all $50 off your first therapy session. Simply go to joinreflect.com and use promo code REAL50 to redeem your discount. That's $50 off your first therapy session when you go to joinreflect.com and use the promo code REAL, all caps, 50, REAL50. Now back to our chat with Amy. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm wondering in your day-to-day, I can't imagine. I guess I know a little bit about what some of the moments in your day-to-day can involve, but in your day-to-day interaction at work, what is your strategy for approaching like unexpected challenge, I guess? Because if you were to try to predict the challenges that would come up, I'm sure you can predict some, but I think you might drive yourself crazy if you tried to predict them all.
Yeah, no, well, definitely right now, because there's no playbook for the time we're in, and there's unexpected things, whether it's city ordinances, state ordinances, whatever, and how it's been politicized. So there's a lot of things going on. I think the biggest challenge right now that we're facing, Ken, especially in our hotel, we have 32 countries represented, is just so much of what's happening around them. Because if it's Black Lives Matters, it's the pandemic, it's immigration, which is a big thing for Miami. Someone in my team has been impacted, a daughter, an uncle, something, somewhere. And that's been new for me coming from Canada. I have to say that has been unusual to sit and talk with them about that, because we've dealt with different racial issues in Canada. Every country has them. So actually, I've read a couple books that have helped me, I think, navigate through that. So that has been the emotional part of what's happening in our world right now, and how it's impacting my team. Everyone, from the dishwasher, the housekeeper, to the person that's the director of resort operations. And so that has been a learning for me, a lot of listening, because it's, you're not going to empathize with a person of color because I haven't had their experiences. So it's knowing how to navigate that, I think, has been the one that's been the biggest learning curve for me, and finding resources really quickly to do that, which I'm grateful I have, and I've had some good dialogue with people to learn how to navigate that. And one of the most recent books I read that I thought was just phenomenal to help me was White Fragility. Was really impactful in reading. And it was, yes, love it. Robin's a rock star. I mean, she really puts it out there in how things happen. So I think that's been helpful for me as a leader to realize, okay, I understand. I have a greater insight now than ever, and continuing to learn every day. So that one has been a challenging to navigate. And then I think with the pandemic again, I think you have 85% of the guests who feel it's very real, and 15 that don't. But now they're impacting my colleagues because they're putting themselves at risk to be at work. And so that's been another one to learn to navigate. So those are kind of big leadership pieces that to go through. And because it's been so polarized here and become quite political as part of all of that, coming together in one big melting pot. But I think that's where I'm glad that I have already had a strong connection with my team, and so the trust was already there, and now we have such a small team that it's I'm with them every day, and they're working with me more directly now than ever. Some of them might tell you that's been challenging, but I think that. I think what they would tell you is that I think what's really important is, and this is, I think, again, a sports thing, right? It's never unclear when you're an athlete that the goal is to win the game. So And when you don't win it, how did we play in reference to our being preparing? So then that's the other dialogue. So I think for me, that translates into leadership is, and you hear Simon Sinek talk about this all the time, is are we giving a clear message of what the expectation is? What does success look like? And what will that look like today and tomorrow and the next day? And then being able to give them the skills and the tools to do that, and that it's okay. Failing is not winning every game. But if we want to get to the Super Bowl, we have to win more than we lose. And I think that's how we've kind of approached this whole thing is through the lens of sports. And it's been, I think, helpful for the leaders.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up Robin DiAngelo's book, first of all, because it changed my framework. I think immensely. It put a lot of structure around, I guess, thoughts or feelings I'd had for me as a white person. And for example, I was on an episode a couple weeks ago that we had somebody from an organization we're partnering with called ULU, who are doing work in humanity, justice, and equity. And I said to him, I was like, I'm 100% guilty of aversive racism. Like after reading that book, I was like, I knew that there was maybe something a little off with some of with how I spoke about definitely not being racist. Mm-hmm. And then I just was able to really articulate a lot more clearly. Ironically, I got a lot of blowback from that episode. I had a couple people reach out, some emails and stuff like that for essentially calling me a racist. And if you've read the book, you know that I guess they're probably right. Like it's, and I'm not going to get defensive about that. I'm just more going to accept it, because if I did those things, then I am, and I've been trained, and those things have been indoctrinated into me, whether I've chosen to have them or not. And I think that's sometimes a huge piece of the battle. And the other thing I'll say on that is just that, connecting to Pete Carroll, the same podcast that I was listening to, he was saying, he said, it was just so simple and so clear, as he's so good at doing. He said, we really just need to love all the Black people in our lives right now. He's like, we just need to love them. He's like, and to me, it's when somebody asks, like, well, what am I supposed to do? That's the answer. Just give them the time, talk to them, ask them questions, be little bit better for them, like that kind of thing. I think that's a really, really solid message that Pete Carroll said only in a way that only Pete Carroll can, I guess. And then when you're talking about things like pandemic and and even just some of the changes that are maybe occurring economically because of it, and other factors, it's really interesting to me that it's showing some true colors, I guess, just in terms of those who connect with authenticity, like yourself, and those who connect because they have to, or because they know that it's something that people are looking for. And I'm curious if you have any tools that you can that you actually consciously use, because I know you have them, but whether or not you can that you consciously know about it or not is another thing, where you really get I guess that gut feeling that you spoke about earlier, coming from your dad and coming from being around animals, would be one. But is there anything else like that, where when you're talking to somebody and they haven't said anything wrong, they haven't done anything wrong, or vice versa? I think our relationship is probably a good example. I don't think I said or did anything that was particularly amazing when we first met, but there was a almost like a vetting process there. Do you have anything else besides the gut feeling that sits in that? Or is it just, you're like, I go with my gut?
Yeah, I do, but I think we have to be mindful of that too, because I know that it can be a blind spot of mine, that I can go too quickly with my gut, because I'm a hard driver as a leader to get results. Maybe that's because we're all in sports, you're in a timed game. So it's not like you have 2 days to win, you have 20 minutes or 40 minutes. So, but I think when I look at it, it would be that um, I would say listening. Like, I think that listening has been a really critical thing for me here, because when you're listening for what they're not saying, um, and I think that as a leader, one of my learnings this year, which sounds very different than what we've just been talking about, Ken, but I've worked with people in a senior level that I've had some, challenging interactions with, but, in one of my daily meditations, Deepak says, we can't see things in others that aren't in ourselves. And I thought, whoa, hold on, but I don't want to be that person. So Amy, back up. How are you leading? Are you sending emails that way? Like, what is that trigger? And so really, having that introspection to be able to say, I think there's some of that in me because I just did that. So I started to kind of journal what were some of the things that I felt set me off with some of the, leaders that I was interacting with, who aren't in the hotel, but, that I work with in the organization, and realized that I had been doing some of those things, and went back to those individuals I work with and said, I really need to apologize for that. Like, I wasn't really looking through, I don't know what happened there, and had a great interaction. And I think that Robin kind of talks about this in her book, when after they meet with that consultant and she doesn't want to do the survey, and she kind of is like, yeah, whatever, I'll tell you how this goes. And, then has to go back and have a dialogue with her colleague. And she said, well, this always happens in race interactions with white and Black people, but what doesn't happen is someone coming to say, will you help me learn? And will you tell me when I do it next time? And so I think that somehow paralleled to what I had learned this year, in that, going through that. And yeah, in the middle of my meditation, my eyes weren't closed anymore. They were open. I had this aha moment going, oh my gosh, I just did that. Wow. Okay, hold on. I need to regroup. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I think that would be learning that I had this year that's been huge for me to kind of pivot that narrative very differently.
Yeah, I think it does answer the question, just in terms. I love what you said about listening for the things that you don't hear, and it's almost like you graduate in terms of understanding how you listen to others, where it's learning how to actively listen at all. And I've said multiple times that the biggest mistake you can make when you're talking about listening is that active listening is like the peak. It's the mountaintop. It's like, actually, it's the foundation. Like, it's just being able to show up and be present enough to listen is the base part of where you're at. And then as we go, as you start talking about listening attentively, you really start to pick out the pieces of what they are saying. And probably a middle stage there would be, you only pick out the things you want to hear and you drop the things you don't. And then you start to graduate a little bit to picking out all of the stuff and analyzing it. And then somewhere near that self-actualization mountain peak in terms of listening is definitely listening for the stuff that you don't hear. And is someone not saying thank you? I love this at like lunch meetings or dinner meetings and stuff, where people don't say thank you to the server ever. Mm-hmm. Like, not that they miss it like once or twice, but everything's going great, everything's fine, there's no like quote unquote negatives in the meeting, but this person just brought you your sandwich or just brought you a refill without you asking, and you don't even acknowledge their presence. And it doesn't necessarily change my view of the person, doesn't necessarily change my interactions that day, but it's like a note. You could just store it, a little piece of data that you can save and use potentially in the future to guide your decisions or not. And that's why I think it does absolutely answer the question, because it 100% attributes itself to vetting people is oftentimes understanding the things that they're not going to show you, and that they may not even be able to see in themselves, I
Right.
think is a big piece.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or not want to see, or not knowing if it's safe to see it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had kind of a funny interaction with an admin assistant in the university I teach at here in Calgary. She sends this email apologizing, and it was to a bunch of people, sends it apologizing for coming off too harsh or something like that in a previous email that she'd sent to us all. And I I replied to her, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you work your butt off for us every day. Like, you have no reason to apologize. I have no idea where this came from. I even went back and reread the email, but it speaks exactly what you were just saying, which is that somebody read that email with something inside of themselves and interpreted it in a certain way. And I don't have that inside me right now. Maybe I have, and maybe I will as life goes on. But they just had something in them in that moment that they read the email in a certain way, and they projected that onto this other person. And I was like, well, just for your information, you in no way owed me an apology. I can't speak to anybody else, but I was like, take back your apology. Because one day I'm really going to blow something, like I'm really going to mess up, and I'm going to owe you one, and I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to actually owe it to you. So we need to make sure that there's high value placed on these.
Right. Yeah. That emotional bank account.
Exactly. Well, I don't want to keep you too long, because none of us need to be sitting in front of a computer more these days. But I am curious, because you touched on some of this stuff, about if there's anything that you're kind of deep into or curious about, reading wise or watching wise, anything that you would kind of like to recommend to people to really touch on. We talked about D'Angelo's White Fragility, and I would say that if you are listening or watching this and you're white, you read that book first. You do everything else after, and then you can start to have some conversations. I think that it's a staple, in my opinion. But is there anything else? It doesn't necessarily need to be in that same niche.
That book has been ongoing. I guess it continues to be part of where I am right now in my journey, Ken, because I think I've shared with you before, but I was selected to be on Hyatt's Global Inclusion and Diversity Council, and we're working with a small group now on Change Starts Here, and that book is the premise in which we're doing that, because you're dealing with Asia, Europe, the Americas, and I think it's a good narrative for us, because I think Europeans could say, well, I don't, the Black Lives Matter maybe doesn't connect to me, or if I'm Canadian or I'm an Asian, it's something different. But I think the premise in which Robin brings up is just our privilege. So I think it's the privilege of, how do we, if we're going to say we believe in that in our organization, to move away from that, then how do we promote? How do we onboard? How do we recruit? What does it look like for females in the same roles as males? How are we managing through some of those delicate things that corporations are talking about today, not just in the US, but worldwide? And how do you change that narrative? And so I'm part of a small group that's working on those pieces to say, how do we navigate this? And and it's right up to the very top. Within this group of 24 people is the CEO and president, Mark Hoppamazian, is leading this group, and he's the one that asked us to read the book. And I have the audiobook, so I think I've listened to it 6 times, but I think that it really has set the groundwork for us looking through the lens of privilege. That doesn't matter what country you're in, that is going to impact you. And so I would say that book has had lots of impact, and that one has been where we are now as an organization. I feel, really a lot of gratitude that I am working with that group to help change that narrative, and to really challenge ourselves as an organization on how to do that. And I think, as a white female in a general manager role, when I first was promoted to this role in the Americas, there was 8 female leaders. So we're growing that now. But even within our corporate office, looking at female versus male, looking at all of those pieces, and how do we start to move and change that landscape. So I think that's really where I am now, because that book is just, it's way more than Black Lives Matters, and that's such a critical piece to what Robin shares. But there's so many other pieces in there that I think that the context she gives them was a bit eye-opening even to me. Wow, when you look at privilege, and I think that's something that we have to address.
Yeah, and I think that it's so refreshing to talk to someone in a role like yours. And actually, I joked before we came on here that the conversations on this show are supposed to be about 45 minutes long, but I don't think there's been one yet that's fallen under an hour. And I'm really trying to be less long-winded personally, but there's always just so much good stuff to talk about. But the people who've been on the show have done a great job of this. But even in your position, just hearing you speak to these kind of issues without your public relations mask on, and not speaking trying to say the right stuff, but just speaking and just showing up and really being here as who you are, and that I think alone is something that is a key takeaway from this that I want to point out right now, because it's very easy for anybody in any kind of leadership role to come on a show like this or anything similar and have a very scripted approach that is making sure that they do say some things and never say other things, and that they have a bit of a mask on that way. So that is, I think you accidentally just shared that piece of learning on top of the fact that you're involved in so much good work with Hyatt. I also am curious about something in terms of your title, because it just occurred to me how much of a misnomer the title of manager is. Like it's like that. As if you're just managing. Like, I'm managing to do this. Like,
Right.
It's really like there's somebody who has more power than I do really needs to step up and change some of these roles, in my opinion, and start making them more of like. It needs to articulate more clearly the hats you wear, and the fact that it's not just getting by, because that's what managing kind of sounds like to me. Because like I'm managing to do this, like
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's actually propelling. Like it's okay. So we're far past the bare minimum. Nobody's dying in the hotel, but we would also like to be quite a bit far away from that, and we'd like to go further than other people have gone. And I think from the moment we met, it's been clear to me that Hyatt in particular has done a great job of wanting to have the tough conversations, wanting to be better, wanting to be more. Like, the growth mindset aspect of Hyatt has always impressed me. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm going to ask you a really tough question that I've never asked on the show before. If you could rename your title, what would it be? Wonder Woman is taken, but you would be qualified.
Right. Yeah. You know, I don't, I think the general part makes sense in that, and this was a hard one for me, right? Because I don't generally manage anything, because I'm not a generalist. So I came from as a specialist. So it'd be like being the defensive coach and then becoming the coach. And then you probably are always over talking to the defensive coach, or vice versa if it's offensive coach. So I think that, my first, stint at becoming a general manager, I think everybody thought, man, she's really always in my business, because I wanted to do all the roles. So I think now I've learned that skill. I'm better at understanding what it is to lead. So in this environment, and so the general part seems to make sense. The manager, no, I think people outside the industry have no clue. People inside the industry, this is like getting the Oscar. I mean, it's the role that everybody in their whole lives works towards. But yes, you're right. The title doesn't sound like that at all. I mean, I could be the general manager of a deli. So, I mean, I could be a general manager of many things, but I don't know. I think to change it, some of our GMs are managing directors. I don't know. I wish it could be probably something more along the coaching, maybe more aligned with sports, because I think that it is, or maybe that's just because I'm a sports fanatic. I'm not sure, but I don't know. It's definitely people, right? It's our directors of human resources are now the colleague experience. We don't have directors of human resources anymore. And it's, directors of the guest experience. We just haven't changed the title that I have, but I'm not sure. That's a really good question. I'm gonna have to think about it. And when I have an answer, I'll let you know, but I'll also, I'll send it off to the team in Chicago to see if they agree. Who knows, we might change the industry. But it's funny, all these typical names in the industry of how the management team is, all those titles are changing with the times, but not this title.
Well,
so I don't think I answered your question, because I don't think I know what I would call it.
You know what? When the higher ups at Hyatt inevitably listen to this all the way through to the end, like I know they will, they can take my recommendation that it either becomes head hotel coach or hotel head coach, something like that. Have that really cool sport reference. It would really set the brand apart.
That's cool. Head coach. Yeah, I like that.
Or director of employee experience, because I do think that is a big, you're definitely responsible for more than that. So maybe there's another caveat, director of employee and guest experience. But I do think that you have a bunch of irons in the fire. You're directing how the employees interact and experience their day, which in turn directs the guest experience and that kind of thing. And
right.
I like I said earlier, I can't imagine what comes up for you in a day, quote unquote managing a hotel. But if people wanted to follow you, I don't know if you have a social media area that you would like to direct people to, but I'd also like to direct, if you can, some people towards Hyatt and some of their inclusion efforts.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think our leader, Mark Hopamazian, has really been the one that's changing the narrative at Hyatt, and has really, refocused our company and our mantra. He would tell you, is we care for people to be their best. It's a very inclusive statement, because it could be it impacts everyone, the guest, the owner of the hotel, the colleague. So I think he is absolutely worth following, and he's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. He's everywhere. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook.
Oh my God, you're on Instagram? You don't even follow me.
Well, I follow all food and bar things. It's kind of like it's kind of an industry platform for me, right? So it's always about the hotels and travel and all of that. But I'm on there. So I would love to. It's Amy S. Johnson is my Instagram, and Twitter the same. So don't do a lot on Twitter, but I do a lot more on Instagram.
Okay, cool. And so I also appreciate how you're I asked you about following you and then the company, and you responded by telling me how to follow the company and then you, which speaks massively to the way that your mind works in terms of where you position yourself, and as opposed to being at the center. I think that you generally put just about everybody else at the center before yourself, and I truly appreciate the conversation today. I'm not even going to pretend like we're saying goodbye, because after I hit stop recording, we're going to keep talking, and then we're probably going to talk again quite a bit in the future, hopefully.
Right.
And obviously I need to get down to Miami. That's goal number one for me, as soon as I'm able to do it safely.
Yes, you do.
But I do just want to kind of wrap up by saying how much I appreciate you for sharing all that. I appreciate you getting super real with me and with the people that'll be listening, and pulling that out of me too, because anybody in my life will tell you that getting me teary-eyed is not something that happens very often, and I know I need to do it more. But sure enough, if anybody's going to do it, it would be the Amy Johnson. But I do have to say that I'm so grateful that your dad was the man that he was. And is he still alive?
No, both my parents have passed.
Okay, so I'm very grateful that he was the man that he was, because he made you the person you are, and that's positively impacting me all the time. So I owe him one, that's for sure. And we'll be talking again soon.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me be part of such a special podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm also very grateful for our friendship and our connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll make sure that we share this with Mark, who has a very long last name that I'm not going to try and say or spell. Can you say it one more time?
Mark Hopamazian.
Okay, so anybody who's looking for a little bit of insight into the inclusion and diversity efforts of Hyatt, and a spelling challenge, you can follow Mark Hopamazian on social media. Thanks a lot, Amy. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Bye. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get podcasts or to this YouTube channel to hear our weekly episodes.